Hi. In this video, I'll take a look at ways you can use customized 3D prints to upgrade your studio, as well as take a look at my Synth Stand and pedal board synthesizer app so that you can create a synth stand that's customized or tailored to your setup. Then I'll also look at a few solutions for cable management using these custom racks I designed and a few other cool prints you might want to check out. These stands can be made to be very stable and are inexpensive to print. And if you don't have a 3D printer, there's a good chance that you'll find either a friend who's happy to print a stand for you or a local service provider who offers 3D printing services. I'll let you know if I test a reliable service in the description of this video. And then if you do want to get into 3D printing yourself, I'll share some tips and ideas I wish I knew before I started and which printer you might want to get. Before I start, no disclosure, this video isn't sponsored by anyone except my supporters on Patreon who will have a more feature-rich version of the app, but the plan is always to make a version available for free. Okay, let's jump right in. I think one of the main benefits of 3D printers is that you can create an object that is particularly suited for your needs and customized to your style. And in the context of a studio, one of the more popular accessories are desktop stands and pedal boards. The thing is, designing 3D objects in CAD software isn't easy. Now, there are, of course, a few ready-made ones you can find in the various online 3D printing portals. But if you want one that's just right for the size of your synth or small setup and don't want to mess with CAD software, then that's what this app is for. When you first open the app, you're greeted with a few starting point templates. The coffee mug, by the way, may look silly, but it's actually pretty important to give an idea of the scale of the object you're about to print. For example, without it, you wouldn't know if this is a phone stand or a tablet tray or something even bigger. Not to mention to give you a sense of scale for the bigger mega trays. Anyway, to get going, just pick a template, and you don't need to worry about committing to a certain template. You can always scroll through the templates on the side and pick a different one. Once you start, let's maybe go for something simple. You've got a few ways of editing a stand. You can just drag the hotspots around in the side view or in the front view. You can hover over a parameter to edit it. So say if I wanted 30 degrees, I'd just type it in. And since not all the parameters could be represented here, you could always scroll through this long list on the side and tab through the different sections. When you edit a parameter here using the hotspot, then you'll also see its value move over here on the side. The assembly view will give you an idea of how the stand comes together, and the print plates view lets you preview the plates the object will be printed on. You can certainly print smaller stands on a single tray, but of course the bigger they get, the more trays you'll need to print them. The app will do its best to fit as many pieces as possible on one tray, with the exception that cheeks are always printed on the side. Due to how 3D printers work, the angles come out much smoother that way. Okay, let's dive in a bit deeper. The profile views are where you want to go to quickly adapt one of the templates to your synth. So for example, let's say that I went for this double electron stand. One of the things that I like to customize first is the infill design. There are quite a few patterns you can choose from here. I'll talk about this later. Anyway, the first thing you'll want to do is make sure that your synth depth works for your synth and the angle works for you as well. Let's go for 45 here. You can change the lip size for a bit more confidence against earthquakes. And if you take it too far, the app will help with that confidence by adding support for the lip. This also works very well for the steeper angled stands. You'll notice this wall here, and that's because the electron stands have a side lip, which gets pretty big. If the lip is big, the idea is that the synths don't fly off if you get excited mid-performance. You can, of course, disable this if you want. By the way, this showed another important feature, that you'll get warnings if the project isn't printable. So, for example, it's going to complain here and here that it can't fit these pieces on the trays. What you'll need to do then is either reduce the size of the stand so that it does fit, or disable whatever features were causing it not to fit. This front height works well if you want to put a synth in front of the stand, and if you don't use this lip support feature, let's go for a more traditional stand size, then you can increase the base height using this parameter. By the way, making these stands not fall over is up to you, as the text here clearly shows, so please try not to mess with gravity. As this view hints in a very not subtle way, you can add a rear stand by clicking here. This too is something you can play with using the hotspots in the profile view, or edit all the rear stand parameters over here on the side. Let's go back to a simple model and talk about the front view. Now, as you may have noticed, there's a beam between the cheeks here. You don't need to print this. You don't need to include this. You can just print two cheeks and use that as a stand and have them any distance apart you like. But I found that the cheeks tend to move a bit left and right as you remove or place a synth. It's doable, but the beam is a better way to stabilize things. You can choose any empty spot in the design to add a beam to the stand, and you can choose more than one as well. Let's keep it simple for now. Anyway, as you can already see here, you can only go so wide on a single print plate. So the app offers a few solutions for this. By default, when you start expanding the span, it will split the beam up to two pieces, as you can see here, with a little dovetail connecting them. Another quick way to make a bigger stand is to increase the cheek width. You can go to an extreme with this, by the way. And then it will require a shorter beam to connect them. The beam doesn't have to go all the way through. Don't tell the app. And then the third quick way to make a larger stand, if you don't want a dovetail connection, is to enable the middle cheek. So that's another way to create wider stands. And then the last way is to enable mega tray mode. We'll talk about this in a bit. Anyway, let's go back to a simpler project and talk about a few things in detail. First, I think one of the most fun features here is the infill option. The default is boring and utilitarian. You just add 90-degree support struts. By the way, you don't have to add infill. Like I said, the physics is up to you, but if the stand is small enough, then these work just fine. The beam is a bit ridiculous. You don't have to use it, of course. Anyway, there are a few factory patterns that you can explore and play with. And they've got their own parameters depending on the infill pattern you choose. I won't go over the parameters of all of these. Waves is cool. You've got amplitude and wavelength. What the beam looks like, by the way, is totally up to the shape you choose and the beam segment you choose. Again, that's up to you to pick something that makes sense. So there are a few options here. These get more interesting the bigger the stand, and it'll try to make things work within the shape. And again, beam selection is up to you. I think that's a good one. Anyway, the most interesting option here, in my opinion, is custom SVG. Now, this is a bit of Wild West territory. Nothing is guaranteed because the app is going to try to not let you print parts that can fall out. So, for example, I found this lovely art by Keith Haring online. These floating parts just won't print. So this is what it looks like when you first load it in, and then you can start playing around with scale to see what happens and rotation. The app does get a bit sluggish if you choose a complex design, and all bets are off with beams here. I'm certainly not going to guarantee these beams. But by the way, for shapes like these, you don't need to use beams if you use a rear stand, because that can give you support. The beams in the rear stand. Let's expand this a bit. Anyway, let's get back to this. There are a few other options here, like you can offset the pattern back and forth, and you can also try to invert it, which again doesn't always work depending on the pattern. Let's maybe choose a simpler pattern. So I found this online, which you might be familiar with. This is inverted, and we can uninvert it, in which case it'll disappear, by the way, if it's not holding on to anything. So again, it's up to you to, I'm going to fast forward through this to get it to work. So let's settle for this. There's even a usable beam here. Okay, let's graduate from front stands and add a rear stand. Now, many of the rear stand parameters are similar to the front stand parameters. One thing that is different, as you can see, the front and rear stands connect using dovetails. Now, as you may see in the 3D model, you don't see any dovetails here, and that's because the hide dovetails on external side feature is on. You can disable this, and the dovetails are no longer hidden. The advantage of not having them hidden is that then this makes the left and right sides identical, which is a bit more of a convenience when you're putting together the stand, and you can just print one twice as opposed to printing two different ones, but I think this is nicer. There's also a dovetail style that slides in vertically. That also prevents dovetails on the side. You can sort of see the connection here. The reason I don't like this style that much is because it's going to require supports to print. As you can see, if you're familiar with 3D printing, this part floats. By the way, if you like, you could load a different infill pattern for the rear stand, as you can see here. Okay, let's move on. Remove the logo and talk about a few more interesting features. Let's hop on to the beam settings section. We already talked about the split beams mode. There are two other interesting features. One is extend beams to the top surface. That'll make them flush with the surface of the cheek. This has advantages and disadvantages. So let's take a look at an example here. So for this stand, as you can see, I chose the surface option. And besides the fact that it's nice that the beam is flush with the surface, it's also more fun to insert. And it just gets stuck in all the way very nicely and has a nice fit. So that's cool. The problem is that this limits your flexibility as far as shrinking and expanding the stand. I mean, I could just remove, and we'll talk about fit clearances soon, but I could just remove the middle cheek and then create a smaller stand. This way, as you can see, I chose a pretty tight fit clearance, but this is pretty rigid as well. Had I printed the beams without extending them to the surface, then I could just simply stick one here, and then make the stand smaller if I wanted to work with a smaller synth to make this into a smaller stand. And then there's also the option to extend the beam down if you want. The reason you would want to do that is if I were to print a beam without that, a very long one that was connected with a dovetail connection, then it could sag in the middle. Extending this down would make this touch the desk and give everything more structural strength. Okay, let's move on to the next important feature, and that's trays. So if a beam isn't enough and you actually want to put maybe a bunch of pedals or smaller synths on a single stand, then you can enable tray mode, and tray mode works for front or rear stands or both. So let's take a look at that. You need to enable it to edit its parameters. Let's maybe go for one tray for now. So tray mode, as you can see, simply combines the two cheeks with a tray initially on top. I didn't mention this earlier. You can change the width of the lines here on the side of the cheek, but as far as trays are concerned, you can also increase the tray depth if you want for extra rigidity and stability. And you can see that here in the render. You can go up to 10 millimeters. Anyway, let's make this smaller. So this is the most economical way to print a tray. It does require supports, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then there are a few other tray styles. The center rib makes it a bit stronger, but obviously requires more filament. Then if you want more rigidity, there is base chord, which is basically adding a bottom to the tray. This will also require supports to print. And then finally, there is entire circumference, which doesn't require supports, but obviously requires more filament. Anyway, the next tray mode is sort of pedal board mode. So this lets you pass wires through the tray. And you can choose the number of slots, and you can also choose the slot width. So these trays are nice with or without the pass-through slots, but as you can see, as far as pedal boards go, this one is pretty narrow, and that's where enable mega tray mode becomes relevant. And this isn't much of a mega tray because they're still pretty narrow. Let's click max span, and now it's beginning to look a bit more like it. You can choose the number of structures in the mega tray in the menu if you like. Really, all you need is up to 3 because you can keep printing middle parts, but I figured people won't do more than 4. So let's start with that. Let's make sure that I'm on maximum span here as well. Here we go. So that's a pretty big structure, but again, you can just print as many of these middle pieces as you like. By the way, in tray mode, since you don't need beams, the beams become dowels that connect the trays, and you can't see it because I've got the full circumference on, but let's maybe cancel that. So let's go into here and choose the basic style. Okay, so now you can see the beams acting as little connectors for the trays, and as you'll see, it'll print as many as you need Now, if you want even more rigidity in your megatrays and are open to a little bit of assembly work, you can always explore DTF beams mode. Now, it's not what you think. DTF means dovetail and flange beams. So rather than having to rely on fit clearance to make sure that everything stays in place here when you activate DTF beams, then two little dovetails get added to the beam, and we can see that over here. And then you also get two little interlocking flanges, or caps basically, that you can attach to the beam to hold the trays together. And you can even choose to add more of these if you want a more rigid connection. I actually recommend putting one at the bottom and one on top. And there needs to be enough room for the dovetail, otherwise it won't be created. So now you've got one DTF holding the top, one on the bottom, and the stand should stay in place really well. If this doesn't work, I recommend trying super glue. And moving on to my favorite tray feature, let's disable slots for a second and go maybe for a simple 2-structure tray, is deboss the tray with SVG. So there's a warning pop-up here that this will impact performance and you should add the deboss sort of around the time you're ready to print. The default is, of course, the loop up logo, which you're definitely going to want to print, but you can load up any one you like. You've got similar sizing features like we saw before. You can enable repeats if you want to have this logo repeat across the tray. And then if you want, you can also treat the tray as one surface. So that's the logo here in the middle. As you can see, it's not covering the middle cheek, which can be solved, of course, by clicking this. It also won't cover the side cheeks by default, but you can enable that if the logo is really big or the image you load up is really big. Then rather it getting chopped off on the side cheeks, you could have it extend there. But I'll talk about why you might not want to do that in a bit. And perhaps by the time you watch this video, there might be additional features here. Then there's the global settings section. Probably most important here is that you fit the print bed or the build volume to whatever your printer situation is, or the service you decide to print this with. And then one of the most important features if you're building a multi-part stand that's designed to fit together a whole bunch of pieces is the fit clearance parameters. So as you saw earlier with the Electron stands, that can matter. If it's too tight, it's not going to fit. If the fit is too loose, then it's just going to go clear through and not going to hold things together nicely. As you can see, we can print pretty interesting beams. But anyway, this will hold the stand, but it won't keep things stable for long. There isn't really one number that works for all printers and all filament types and all nozzle sizes, which is why I included a few tests to help you out. The first is a generic fit test just to get you familiar with the topic while wasting as little filament as possible. You get this trapezoid shape and 4 different trapezoids that fit in it, and the fit clearance is written on the piece itself. So hopefully you see this on camera. This is 0.20 millimeters, which is a very loose fit and should slide right through. At least it does for me. Then there's 0.15, which in my printing situation is kind of like a nice fit, but you know, not too tight. Then there's 0.10, which is a solid fit that's even beginning to be a bit hard to take out. And 0.5 for my print settings either doesn't go in or kind of feels like it might with a lot of effort and a hammer, but probably not ever come out. So that's just the generic test to get you familiar with your printer, and you can customize its parameters if you like. And then you can print the actual joints in your project. So definitely before using as much filament as it will take to print this project, which is based, by the way, on the app's not accurate estimate, about 1.2 kilos. Now, since this is a pretty complex project, let's maybe choose a simple project because this is important. So when you press this button, it's going to explain what's going on. You can choose 3 different fit clearances. One is the project default, and then by default, -4 and +4. You can decide how much extra material you want to print beyond each joint, choose the format, and then generate the test. Now, this is an important one. The app gives each print a unique 5-character ID. This goes in the preset file that you can save. It goes in the 3MF or STL file you download, and it gets printed on the actual piece. Let's open up the project and see what we get. So in the case of this simple project, as you can see, we got the chopped off segment that the beams go into and 3 different beams which may look the same, but somewhere on them you'll find, here we go, both the clearance parameter and the unique identifier for both the project file and the STL or 3MF file. And as you can see, each of these has a different fit clearance number on it. In real life, by the way, it looks like this. So first, download the joints, and you can then test the clearance, see if you like it or not. Try the 3 different options to see what you like best. By the way, this is how the hidden dovetails feature works. This piece represents, by the way the beam dovetails connect. So I think this is a very useful feature and can save you a lot of filament before printing the actual parts. Now you may ask yourself, hang on, how did I get these colors on the sides of these side cheeks? That's not something you do in the app. That's actually something you do in the slicer. This is what the project looks like in the slicer. And to get the colors going, you choose a color for the object. And then you want to make sure that the project has the filament you want to transition to. Let's say go for blue, hit slice. And then the way you get the magic to happen is you go down the layers as far as you want to go, wherever you want to change color. Let's say go to 5 or 4, then right click, change filament, go to blue. Then if you want to go back to yellow, whoops, on the other edge, just go all the way up here. Let's go a few layers back, right click, change filament, back to yellow, hit slice, and you've got the 2 colors going. You can see a purge tower was added here. I noticed the slicer might add this in the middle of the object in some cases, so just move it if it does up here somewhere. And then the other important thing is supports, like I mentioned, for tray mode. So typically the slicer will tell you if the object needs support or not. So let's go for maybe a little bit wider here. And there is something I wanted to show you. I'll make this smaller. I don't know if it's a slicer bug or I'm doing something wrong, but let's maybe go for this. So now we've got a bunch of stuff on the same plate. I'll download this. Yes, always do yes. Always get the unique identifier in. Trust me, you're going to want it if you want to go back to a model. Anyway, let's open this project in the slicer. So this is what it looks like. And if we just set this to be printed, then it's going to fail. You can see it's complaining in the warning here. So don't print it like this. Rather, go to supports. And I don't mess with these. I just enable it. I'm sure there are a ton of videos on the web to optimize this. Anyway, let's hit slice again. And this is what I wanted to show you, that we're getting these tree supports, but also a serious warning because of conflicting objects. So as you can see, the support is running into the dowel beam. So the solution is to either move it a bit or just move it onto a new plate. Let's try to move it. And now it's not complaining anymore. So just be aware of that you might need to move stuff around before you can print these objects with supports. And just because it's so satisfying, I thought I'd do this with you for this stand. This, by the way, is the dowel beam. By the way, if I didn't like the fit here, then luckily I've got the project number embedded. Hopefully you can see this on camera. So if I wanted a tighter or looser fit, I'd just search my hard drive for this 3MF or STL file and either resize this in the slicer or change the settings and re-export this. Anyway, this is what the supports look like in real life. Let's see how it goes live on camera. A bit violent with these. Okay. So I think that's it. This is either artwork or garbage, probably garbage. Remember, another option would have been to just go for an entire circumference tray. Would have given this more strength, even though this is pretty strong, and you wouldn't get these nasty connections, but they're on the inside. Anyway, that's the piece. One thing I did want to mention about printing experiences, notice these lines here. This isn't a bug in the software. It's actually a result of the 3D print moving from this kind of print area to printing this entire beam. And that causes these lines here. Here too, there are a bunch of tips and tricks on the internet on how to avoid this. What I would do next time is just print the pattern right up to the cheek, like I mentioned to you earlier. I talked about that feature that lets you chop off the design here. It would look nice with a clean cheek and help minimize this seam. Anyway, this is this piece of the stand. It just happens to be a fit for this piece with the hide dovetails feature. I made sure to have a nice tight fit here. So this connection, because of the relatively minimal clearance, isn't going anywhere. So that's how all these parts fit together, and it's ready to become a really big mega stand. So that's it for my synth stand and pedal board synthesizer. Moving on to other studio problems, let's talk about cable management. There are quite a few 3D printable cable management solutions out there, but I didn't find one that quite matched my needs, so I created it. The idea here is simple. There are 3 types of stackable trays for different kinds of cables. Thin ones, medium thickness ones, and really thick ones. They're stackable and rearrangeable. You can glue them together if you want, but I didn't. So you can move them around and change them and play with them that way. You can print as many of these as you want and stack them or put them side by side. And as an homage to the Gridfinity system, I'll try and flip things over. They're sized for Gridfinity if you want to put them on a tray, along with other systems or to keep multiple tray stacks together. If you print them with supports, you'll get straight lines. If you print them without, you might get these saggy lines. And then one important thing regarding how to use these, I always wrap the cables inside in a way that both edges are visible. So I can just scan the front and see what is the cable type that sits inside. Anyway, I printed about 20 or more of these. I like them a lot, and I'm going to make the designs available for free if you want them. Then besides printing music studio utilities, you can actually print instruments. You'll need to learn how to play these, which I did not, but I'm sure with reverb it'll sound great. There's also this, which is cool, I think, and needs some latex, but sounds like this. This huge bass ocarina sounds great. I don't have it with me to demonstrate because I gave it to someone, but I highly recommend it. Another studio accessory you might want to print is knobs. You can use these to customize your synth or to replace sticky knobs. I didn't create a knob generator yet. Let me know if you'd like to see that. Otherwise, there are templates you can download online. This is what a phone stand looks like using my app. This is the repeat logo feature, and there are plenty of other models online. And of course, a backlit logo doesn't hurt either. I did want to wrap up this video with a few tips and ideas I learned along the way. First thing regarding which printer to buy, I'm not a printer reviewer, but after doing quite a bit of research, I bought the Bambu Lab P2S because it's enclosed and has an accessory called a Vento box with a HEPA filter, which is supposed to suck up any 3D printing nastiness. I probably would have bought the X2D if it was available at the time because it lets you print 2 colors at a time without waste, and it has a built-in HEPA filter. That said, the popular opinion is that if you only print using PLA and PETG, which I only print using PLA, there's no need for filtering as long as you're printing in a well-ventilated area. So if that's to be believed, the Bambu Lab A1 would have done just fine. It has the exact same print volume and would have printed this masterpiece just as easily at a fraction of the price. I would not, however, save more money and buy the mini version of these printers like the Bambu A1 Mini. These have a significantly smaller build volume and will seriously limit you in terms of stand size. Another reason you might want to stick to a less expensive printer as of the making of this video is because things are moving pretty fast in this industry, and multi-tool head printers like the Snapmaker U1 or the FlashForge Creator 5 are driving the price of multicolor printers down. You don't need a multicolor printer to print any of the accessories I mentioned in this video. All this requires is an AMS because I only swapped colors every layer. However, if you do want to make prints that swap colors within the same layer, then prints like these or this one, this is a character from a video game my daughter made. Anyway, prints like these swap filament every layer, and every swap generates printer waste. All that doesn't happen with multi-tool head printers. Then next tip, the next big financial decision you need to make after deciding which printer to get is deciding which filament to buy, meaning by which brand or company. The black in these 2 stands is by 2 different companies, and you can probably tell the difference. Both are matte black, but one is less matte than the other. Spoiler, this one is from Bamboo Lab and costs between 2 to 3 times this one by Elegoo. Again, there's a difference. I couldn't say which is better. I actually think the logo came out a bit nicer with the Elegoo one. Even if not, it's immaterial, and when you're printing big pieces like Synth Stands, cheaper filaments can save a lot of money. The next issue is filament type. There are so many filament types that'll make your head spin. PLA is the easiest to print, and I found works great for stands. PETG is supposed to withstand heat better if you plan to leave the stand in your car or have a synth that really heats up too much. To me, PLA is fine. It's super strong. I don't think I can break this. Again, don't come to me if you print thin beams from your design, but these are pretty sturdy. Don't be tempted to buy carbon fiber versions of these filaments. I tried a carbon fiber PETG and it was a pain to print with, and you need to mess with drying PETG filaments. I've had this material and this material since I bought the printer a few months ago. They've been in the AMS, but I didn't dry them and they print just fine. If you want to save a bit on material, you can go to the printer settings to strength and reduce the infill percentage. Don't be too aggressive, but this can save you a bit. You can also go to more aggressive infill types like lightning. I wouldn't do this either unless I was printing a draft. This cut down our filament spend quite a bit, but considering that all this is empty space inside, it's something you might feel a little less confident putting a synth on. But again, it's great for drafts. Another tip, while you can stand these and then perhaps print more than one on a plate, don't be tempted to do that. It doesn't fit anyway in this case, but even if it did, let's maybe make it a bit smaller. Anyway, even if it did fit, then the Z-axis resolution would be really crappy. You'd see these lines on the angle. The stand would never be this smooth. Another tip, these stands can get pretty big. Make sure you've got enough material on your spool to print what you're about to print. And then final and most important tip, be patient and experiment because things can go wrong. That's how you learn. So for example, the first print of this came off the bed and popped the magnetic printhead off its place. I just cleaned the bed with alcohol and tried again, and I haven't had issues since, but setbacks happen. Also remember, the app is in beta as of the making of this video, so sanity check everything, things might go wrong, and feel free to use the feature requests/bug reports button. Oh, and one more super important tip, you can change the coffee here to a latte if you prefer that. So that's it for now. As of the making of this video, both the Synth Stands Synthesizer app and the cable tray design files are made available for free, but at some point I'll probably make a few app features only available to the people who subscribe on my Patreon, because that's what makes this channel possible. If you check it out, you'll also find my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks there, and plenty of multi-sampled instruments. Hit like if this was useful. Don't forget to ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.